as a traveler, as a Black traveler, you in a lot of ways just feel free outside of the United States. Interestingly, like I have no rights anywhere else, like by definition, but you feel there's this freedom that you feel even in countries that are not African countries, even in countries that are not predominantly Black. There's the freedom that I personally feel, and so.
Hey, welcome to Travel Tuesday Happy Hour, where we interview dope people doing dope things from around the world. Today, we have an amazing gentleman here, one of my Ghanaian brothers. Brother, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Well, I'm Joey LaRoche. I like to think that I'm a Ghanaian for sure. I mean, we did get citizenship while we were there. So that's what I'm gonna lead with today. But in my non-travel life, which has been a lot lately, given 2020 and the pandemic, I'm an educator and I work for a large charter management organization in New Orleans. We serve about 7,000 kids. So a lot of my travel actually comes because I have a school schedule and I just use all of those breaks that we get to just travel. Of course, I don't get the long summer because I'm not a teacher anymore, but we get a lot of other breaks that, I use to travel where I don't even have to use PTO for it because we get the breaks baked in. So that keeps my fix going and, give me my little hit in the veins from the passport. But yeah, that's what I do.
Let's take a couple steps back and in your role in the school, in a charter school, like let's first talk about the charter school, right? Like what kind of charter school is it?
Yeah, so in New Orleans, every public school, so charter schools are public schools, number one. But in New Orleans, every public school is a charter school. Like our system is completely unique and it's managed by a bunch of either single site charter schools or charter management organizations, which has several. We are the largest, and so we have 13 different schools serving about 7,000 kids, but there are a lot of organizations and single sites, but all of us are public schools, publicly funded, like any other public school. It's just that we have a contract, a charter with the district to operate the school and not the district themselves operating. They do other services for us. So unified enrollment, unified disciplinary practices to make sure equity is happening across the different organizations, particularly in the discipline side and the culture side. But yeah, so I started as a teacher in that organization actually. 2008 feels like yesterday, but it was so long ago. I mean, I guess I'm old now. But started doing that in 2008, taught, and just started having the other jobs, assistant instructional coach, assistant principal. Eventually, I became a principal of a high school down here in New Orleans, and I'm from New Orleans, so that was really special for me to come back home after college and do that work. And actually, that probably is the work of educating and teaching, and how hard that this grind was in some of our, most underserved neighborhoods where opportunity just doesn't seem to be found frequently. And of course, New Orleans. So I teach pretty much 100% Black kids and have increasingly so we have some Latinx students in the city, but largely Black kids. And that's what, that's my ministry. I went to, in New Orleans, a public high school, but it was selective admissions and people tried to, get me to go back there and to go into a school like that. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm grateful for the experiences I had, but that's not my ministry. Like somebody else can go do that. I want to go, where we can serve like a lot of kids and give a lot of opportunity and prove what's possible for kids that didn't get those same opportunities, because everybody can do these things. And so it's the work of educating and teaching that was so much of a grind that I was like, I need something. I need a break. I need to do something. And that is literally how I started really getting a travel bug. I had traveled internationally before and across the United States in, spurts before. But after that first year of being a principal, I was like, this is the hardest thing I ever have done. And I can remember like walking off the graduation stage after the seniors had graduated that year, my first year, and going to the airport. I was like, deuces. And I went to St. Martin. And since then, it was like, a trip a year, 2 trips a year. And then just exploded. It was like, can I use all the breaks for it? So
let's take a couple steps back. I really want to kind of focus on the education side of things. Okay. Has New Orleans, or is it more just the city, or is it a state type of thing where all the schools, and has it always been that way, where all the schools are charter schools contracted out to the school district?
Yeah, so we have it's New Orleans that is unique as a city, as a district that is 100% of the public schools are charter schools. So if you're a child in a public school in New Orleans, you go to a charter school. But the state does, that is made possible because the state has like laws that make it such that that could be a thing. And New Orleans is still unique in the state. Like there are pockets of charter schools around Louisiana, just like there are in lots of states. But New Orleans is concentrated for us. And it wasn't, when I started teaching, that wasn't the case. It was still majority traditional district run schools. But I also started teaching like 3 years after Hurricane Katrina, which 3 years really means like a whole year was kind of lost anyway, because people were scattered. I had gotten sixth graders who were, reading on the first grade level routinely. My average reading level was about a second grade, like late second grade level. And I was a sixth grade reading teacher. And so you realize those kids had just sat out of school for a long time. They were dealing still with the trauma of Hurricane Katrina. And I taught in Central City, New Orleans. And a lot of people hear about the Ninth Ward, New Orleans, and that is where I was a principal. And it's certainly like a community that was ravaged by Hurricane Katrina, but also like ravaged by the infestation of the crack epidemic and all of those things that happened to us, as Black people across the country. But in New Orleans, we were no different. Central City was probably even more affected and still is riddled with most of the violence and such in the city than what you might hear about nationally. Ninth Ward gets a lot of attention, but Central City is where I started teaching. It was, the most significant poverty levels and lack of opportunity, happened in Central City. So that's where I was teaching, man.
Awesome. So you mentioned graduation for your seniors and then getting on a plane. Was that your first travel, or was that like your first, all right, I'm done with this, I'm out of here?
Yeah, that was, I think, my first solo travel internationally. Okay. Yeah, and I just went to an island, St. Martin, loved it, rented a car, drove around this island that was half Dutch, half French, and you never know which side you're on, but it's small, it's fine, taking risks and such. So that was the first of that. It wasn't the first time that I traveled internationally. I got the opportunity the first time to travel internationally in college through a kind of study abroad, but I went to Vanderbilt University in Nashville, and we had these Maymesters where you could go just for the month of May to take one course, a 3 credit hour course. And mine was in London. So it was a theater in London program. So, which was awesome because, it's a regular 3 credit hour tuition, but you stay in this nice hotel for like 3.5 weeks to 4 weeks. And every Monday through Thursday, we saw a different show and wrote a paper about that show each night, like 2-page, 3-page paper, like nothing significant. Friday was like kind of yours to explore. So people would take like weekend trips up to Scotland or wherever, And I always think like if I were, it's so interesting. I was like the only Black person. I was the only Black person on this adventure, but I knew a lot of them from being like in the theater scene and such. But what I realized was like there were so many things that I didn't do with them as a group, not because I wasn't connected to them, but because I didn't understand when I was coming over there and going overseas, like, oh, you could go take weekend trips on a train somewhere close. I'm like, whoa, don't you have to plan ridiculously for that? Like, how do you do that? And they would just leave me in a hotel, and I had no idea. So looking back on it now, I realized like that's what privilege is. Like they grew up, they came to London in 2006, like understanding that. And we were all 19, 20 years old. And I was like, what? So this was probably more eye-opening for me than anybody else. And I think back about all the things I would have done that time. And so the regret of that a little bit has fueled more of my like, let's go do whatever. It doesn't matter how long I got there. I can go hit another country this way and like, just like learning as you go. So.
Oh yeah. Cause I mean, and I was going to actually ask you on that too, is like, what was that experience like being a kid from New Orleans, not really having, cause I mean, this probably was maybe not your first time outside, but like, Kentucky going to school was probably your first time leaving your neighborhood, your city. And having gone to another country, your mom's like, don't talk to strangers. Don't be letting these white people fool you into doing these things that you're not supposed to be doing. Coming from a Christian background, just make sure you pray and make sure that, everything is okay. But what we're not told is go and explore. You know what I mean? And not even just that, is we're also looking at the financial implications, right? Like, yo, I'm here on I'm still paying these loans that's sending me out here. So, I may not have enough money to just go travel, but you don't know hey, it's about 80 euros to fly back and forth from London to Paris. You know what I mean? It's about, if you're in London, it's about 50 euros to catch a train over to Scotland. You know what I mean? And so, these are the things, and this is the reason why I'm doing this show, right? To show people like you and I and people back where you're from is like, yo, I realized that my ability to see the world was stifled by the lack of knowledge and the lack of seeing people like me do it. And now that people like you, you was about to spend the whole summer in the Central Americas, right?
Yeah, man.
You know what I mean?
You brought that up. It just hurt me again.
I know.
This damn pandemic.
I know actually there's a segment we're gonna get to that.
All right.
But yeah, so tell me, how did that kind of spark your drive for travel beyond like realizing like, yo, I don't want to say squandered, but you kind of like regretted not being able to take advantage like your white counterparts were able to.
Yeah, it was their privilege of understanding their opportunities that I didn't understand. And so got overseas, which is the hardest part, and didn't take advantage of the easiest part because I had no idea about it. But what's interesting is, that I was a kid who grew up in school, like did well in school, but never liked history, for instance. I think now I realize there was so much about my schooling, and I went to public schools in New Orleans, and I just realized there was so much about my schooling that didn't teach me the history that was most relevant to me, like many of us who look like us. But it was through travel that I became more curious about because I'm seeing now people and cultures and things like that I was like, oh, if I'd have had this experience, I might be more interested or just have something to hang my hat on in terms of when I'm learning the history of the world and, things like that. But it was like the most boring thing to me. And so interestingly, being in London, I was finally able to see up close the things that I did learn in history classes because it's their history that we learn primarily. Right. And so to go to the British Museum, that was like the most fascinating thing to me. Because I'm like, oh, this is like these people who I'm walking around with, this is their life. We were in a hotel truly one block away from Buckingham Palace. I think it was called the something Hotel Buckingham Palace. Like we were a block away and could see that, oh, these people are just living their lives there. And what felt only like TV and only like history books to me. And so I wouldn't say like at that time I was woke, but yet, but it was, we didn't even use that term, in 2006, but it was, in retrospect, it was an awakening because, I felt the most different. I did look the most different. I was the only Black person. I felt the most different, but interestingly felt pretty free because London, at least, it's still, but also then was a really international city. And you see people of all colors, walks of life. It's a lot of New York. You can see that in New York a little bit as well. But I didn't have that in New Orleans. Like I came from a chocolate city. Katrina happened and my mayor got on and was like, we're keeping New Orleans a chocolate city. Then I go to Vanderbilt and it was like, oh, you're clearly the minority. It was the first time I felt like, overt racism in any way, but it's because you are just surrounded. You are the minority and you're surrounded by white people. And I had found this community of white people in the theater world that I went abroad with, and it certainly was invited everywhere by them, but didn't understand how to take advantage of it. And so, just even in talking to you about this, like so much of my whole life is wrapped in really the same story and what I try to impart as an educator and what I do as a traveler and how I see myself in the world. Especially nowadays when everybody's kind of talking about identity and identity politics in our age group, at least, like it feels like all of it is actually just the same story. And it would be easy to have regrets, as I was expressing before about like what I didn't get before. But what I can do is make sure that there's opportunities for all the ones after me to not have to get to my age before they feel it or experience it and see it. Exactly. And even in that page, like I still got to do trips with my family. You know, I left the city before I left the state. We would do family trips to Florida, to Texas, whatever was close to us. I had been, to other further places, California, whatever. So I had some perspective of travel, right? That many of my students did not have at all. Like Katrina was why they stepped outside of the city in some cases, but it wasn't until we took them in a lot of ways to, a Florida trip or whatever on a bus for 12 hours that they started to get some of that experience. And so really, it's a lot of that lived experience, but now for the whole world. And you realize when you start doing it internationally, like it's not that different to go there than it is to across your country, especially the United States, which is a huge country. It takes a long time to get to California. I can get to a lot of countries faster than California, and have now.
Well, you think about it, like, the pandemic really made me explore the United States more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, my most recent posts are all local posts, like South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida.
Yeah.
It's made me appreciate more because as a child, growing up in New York, we only went upstate, maybe to Atlantic City, maybe to Philadelphia, you know what I mean? And that was kind of the extent. And one thing that I also want to mention is that traveling, it doesn't have to be getting on a plane and going overseas. As you mentioned, you guys traveled to different places, to different locations, and you were one of the fortunate ones that were able to see beyond your backyard. You know what I mean? And that's definitely the dopest part of it. So I guess my next question is, are you able to bring back these experiences of your travels to kind of like influence the way you manage the educational? So what I was asking earlier was, are you leveraging these experiences from your travel to kind of influence the way you manage education in this charter school today?
Yeah, I think and it's not, I wouldn't say this is solely from travel. It's also just from the conversation around the world in our country. It's also just from being an educator, but in the same way that as a traveler, as a Black traveler, you in a lot of ways just feel free outside of the United States. Interestingly, like I have no rights anywhere else, like by definition, but you feel there's this freedom that you feel even in countries that are not African countries, even in countries that are not predominantly Black. There's the freedom that I personally feel, and so that sparks the questioning of like, why is that? What about this place is doing that? And I think we all know the stories of how entrenched, this country is just built on racism and racist practices. And it's in everything that we have in our education system, in our classrooms, in every sector. And so I think that piece of the travel and like understanding that through travel and understanding what the opposite of that feels like just in your spirit drives a bit of the motivation to help others get free, right? And the fastest way I know to help people feel free is travel. I think the way that I believe that we truly get free is education. And one of the education for everybody, right? And so not just Black kids understanding their identity and getting more woke, but a lot of like, you've heard of like the trainings and the diversity and equity, trainings and working classes and stuff. That needs to be happening in these private schools that are predominantly white. This needs to be happening in places where it's being passed down on a dinner table. Like it needs to be happening everywhere, but that's where I see like the greatest opportunity. That's still just education, right? And so education in a meaningful way. And I don't mean like just sitting behind, a whiteboard somewhere or 2020 a Zoom screen. But I think, Epictetus's quote is my favorite one. It says, "Only the educated are free." And I really believe that it's my signature underneath so many, it's the quote underneath my signature for so many years. And it's driven a lot of my work and passion. And I think traveling has helped me like shape that same quote and add some color to that same quote, because now it's like I felt freedom in a way that I thought I was like free-ish, before, I'm an American. I got rights. I'm free. I'm not an enslaved Black person in, the late 20th century, early 21st century. But so surely I'm free, right? And you realize, actually, no. And then when you go somewhere else, you're like, oh, yes, like it can feel like this because they get to feel it on a regular basis. And as you know, being in Ghana, when people were telling us, welcome home, they said it in a way that, like, my sister now lives with me this year. And if she were to come back from a trip and I say, welcome home, I don't know that I would say it with the same reverence and spirit that we heard from them routinely. We will walk down, we were walking past like a fish market. It stinks like crazy, but the air is so clear and beautiful. And people would say, like, they just knew we were Americans. They knew we weren't, from there. They would say, welcome home, brother. And it was said, like, we felt it every time, like at the core of us, like, oh man, like, it's like they've been waiting on us, for generations to come home. And of course, it was the magic of the year return and, that time that we went. But I also felt it in Senegal. I also felt it in Tanzania. In some ways,
you decided I think to go country hopping while you was already out there. So you was just flexing on us at that point.
I did a few things, but yeah, it's different in African countries, but you feel this freedom outside of America, period, I think.
So is that what drives you to travel? Because like, it sounds like similar to one of my other guests is the first time they traveled, they felt like they were home. And so from that point forward, it was really about exploring other countries to see if they can continue to feel that home-like feel. So what continues to drive you and push you to travel?
It's interesting because I have a hard time defining. Like sometimes when I'm like, my mood is off and I'm not feeling well, or like I'm just not feeling the world or life or whatever, I often say, like, I just need some like veggie juice. I need to go work out. I need to like reset myself. My friends have started to notice, like, you need a trip. Like you need to get out of here.
And you don't need a Snicker, you need a trip.
Yeah. Like even when I don't feel it in myself, I thought I was fine, right? And then I was like, oh, I'm good. And then I went to, I don't know if it was Dominican Republic or something. I did like a weekend trip somewhere close enough to do a weekend. Colombia, I think it was, like last November. And it was like maybe a 4-day long weekend trip. And I remember going, dang, I did need this. And I didn't even realize it when you're like deep in the whatever, the country, the work, you're just life and all the like mush of the world. But when I went there, I got off the plane and started being around. I was like, oh yeah, I can feel the weight coming off. I can feel the freedom. It feels like vacation. And I didn't even think I needed vacation, but it's hard to place like what the thing is. But for me, I need it frequently to be my best self. Yeah.
That's deep. Because I mean, it just sounds like it's a form of therapy, right? Or a form of release to be able to recharge. Because it sounds like your job is very intense, right? Because you're responsible for, you said, over 6,000 students and making sure that you have the top tier program in the city. And so because of that, and I see you're moving around, moving and shaking, kissing babies and doing all that fun stuff like a politician, right? And it's one of those things where, we sometimes don't realize in the midst of it all that we need some of these things. Does that make sense?
Yes. Sorry.
You know what I mean? Sometimes, no problem. Yes. Sometimes in the midst of it all, like you said, like, the hardest thing for a lot of us in our culture to accept is that we need therapy, right? Mm-hmm. But therapy can be seen in so many different facets in so many different ways. And, it just sounded like that was kind of your release, your speaking to an objective body and being able to kind of recharge your cells.
Yes, I definitely get renewed in it. And just, as a disclaimer, I wholly recommend to everybody who looks like us, to everybody, period, like go get real therapy, but also go travel because it's helpful and you can do both of those things and you're better because of both of them. So go get some real therapy.
Right. So you mentioned freedom earlier, right?
Yeah.
Freedom as a Black man in the United States. We're no longer in the 1920s, the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 90s. 2000s.
Mass incarceration.
Right?
Hey.
Right.
I live in the mass incarceration city in the world, capital.
Right. Right.
So.
And so travel. How does that make you feel as a Black man? Right? How does it feel to go somewhere else and possibly be treated same, different, indifferent, better?
Yeah. It's impossible to travel anywhere and not bring my baggage of being a Black man in America.
Yeah.
Yep. And anticipating everybody else's response to me, which in some ways is like helpful when you are in foreign countries where you don't know where you're at. And so your conditioning to be cautious anyway is useful, but it's liberating in some ways because you get to actively feel the feeling of like that shedding as you keep getting proven wrong about other people, and how they're going to respond to you, because that's not their way. Like they don't orient to you or to the world in that way. And in some cases they do. Like there's racism all over the world. Like colonialism happened everywhere, on this planet. And but you see the effects. Like I don't think I felt it anywhere more severe than in the United States. And I've been to enough other places in enough, on enough continents to get like, oh, there's like so much about people that are the same. There's so much about racism that is the same, but there's also, here are the shades of differences, and it is most severe. And we are more in love with this systemic racism in the United States than other people seem to be anywhere else. And it's mind blowing. And truly, when I came back I think it was Ghana. When I came back from Ghana, I was like, I'm ready to go back. Like I wish there was a way I didn't have to go back to the United States. And I could have stayed, because having been to Africa before Ghana was probably still the first 100%, like, no, not 100%, but like real Black country that I went to. I had just gone to Tanzania for Thanksgiving right before it. But in Ghana, we realized at some point, it was like day 7, we realized we have not laid eyes on a white person. They've not even walked past us. It wasn't until we studied.
They were at Elmina Castle. They were at Elmina Castle taking pictures of Black kids.
Pictures of us. That's right. Yep. And like, are you on your birthright trip? Like things like that. They would ask us. But that was when we realized, that was like day 7 of 9 or something. We realized, wait a minute, here's the first white people we've seen in like 7 days or 8 days. And we didn't even know as Americans, as Black Americans, what that felt like. And our own conditioning was like, wait, that's uncomfortable, but also that feels great.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And I got a lot of white friends. I love them to death. Love drinking with them too. I'm about to go do that in a few, with a few of them. And I work with so many who are truly near and dear to my heart. But it was my first time in my life I went any stretch of time without laying eyes on a white person. And there was just something liberating about that.
Nice. So, you talk about that and it's liberation. Like, why haven't you been an expat yet? Because you're the perfect example of a person that would have probably like, look, it was great, peace. Is it the love of what you're doing in education, or is it just you just